When families gather for the holidays, they often plan fun activities to create unforgettable memories. The Jones family decided to explore Nutty Putty Cave, unaware of the terrible loss they would suffer. This is the heartbreaking account of the tragedy in Natty Party Cave. John Jones was excited for a fun-filled day as he set out to explore Natty Party Cave in the Utah desert near Salt Lake City. Although unfamiliar with this cave, he and his brother Josh had spent much of their youth exploring various caves in Utah. He considered himself an experienced caver, though he had slowed down in recent years. He was married, had a child, and was studying medicine at the University of Virginia. His busy schedule left little time for caving. During Thanksgiving break, John returned home to relax with his family. They planned a day of hiking and exploring in Natty Party, considered a beginner-friendly cave. The cave's main areas were interesting for everyone. There was a maze-like chamber with tunnels around large rocks and a slanted zone called the Slide. The cave system was well mapped in most walkable areas. There were more challenging zones, known only to experienced cavers, such as the birth canal. Despite their popularity, these sections often trapped people in their extremely tight spaces. Natty Party had reopened to the public after years of closure due to cavers getting stuck in these difficult passages. Some made it through, but others remained trapped, needing urgent assistance to escape alive. Due to these rescues, a permit system was implemented, requiring 2 experienced cavers per group. Josh obtained a permit for a group exploring on Tuesday, before Thanksgiving, November 24, 2009. John's pregnant wife, Emily, stayed home with their 1-year-old daughter, Lizzie, for a quieter evening with her in-laws. 11 family members and friends began the adventure in the cave's main open sections. Eventually, John and his brother Josh led 2 friends to find more challenging tunnels. They had heard stories about the birth canal and checked the map for its location. It was a long, narrow passage with a tight squeeze at the end. If one made it through the tightest part, there was a small chamber at the end to stand and turn around. They knew the birth canal would be tight and could induce panic, even inexperienced cavers. They split up to find this particular tunnel. John and Josh took the left passage, moving through a small tunnel for about 15 feet. The tunnel ascended and descended at various elevations. In the next 10 feet, there were rock ledges and tight spaces, requiring the caver to rotate their body in various orientations, first shoulders, then hips, and finally twisting legs in the right direction. It wasn't just about forcing the body through a tight hole. This area was called the corkscrew because only small, flexible individuals had passed, using all their skills to slowly maneuver through the panic-inducing contortions. Beyond the corkscrew, the passage ascended another 5 feet before turning downward over a rock ledge with a sharp 90-degree left turn. So far, cavers had used this small area beyond the corkscrew to turn back through the difficult section. 5 years earlier, a 16-year-old named Brock Clark had gotten stuck in this part of the corkscrew. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 140 pounds, yet he got stuck trying to turn around. Rescuers took 14 hours to free him. John was exactly where Brock had been trapped, attempting to turn around. Since John was 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds, he knew turning in this tunnel was not an option for him. He was in a 12-inch high space without enough lateral room to curl his body for rotation. He moved forward toward the ledge area and squeezed over the top. It was a tight spot to pass, but he thought he saw it widen further ahead. He inhaled, pressed through the squeeze, and pulled himself forward using the rocks ahead. He advanced head first at a downward angle, thinking there was space to turn ahead. John didn't know that no one had crossed this ledge before. He was in completely unexplored territory. Despite being in an extremely tight and uncomfortable position, John remained calm. He was confident an opening lay ahead. He believed he was somewhere in the birth canal, where many cavers had felt stuck, but were fine once they reached the other side. Once he passed a tight spot, he began sliding downward into the tunnel's depths. He was almost through, trying to stay upright and figuring out how to push himself back. He still couldn't turn and was now upside down. Gravity pulled his 200-pound body against the force of his arms. He shouted to Josh, telling him not to follow but to go back. They discussed options and decided moving forward too. Attempt turning was the best idea. At this point, he was collapsing onto his shoulders and head, and needed to make a move to escape his vertical position. His headlamp revealed a hole in the ground ahead. He felt more hopeful, thinking they'd laugh about this misadventure at Thanksgiving dinner. He made a slight turn and aimed for the hole. How he ended up in this tunnel hole is unknown. He may have slipped, hit his head, and become wedged in the tight space. Another theory is he misinterpreted what he saw, thinking it was an opening rather than a dead end. Either way, John ended up in a tiny opening at the tunnel's bottom, incredibly tight, only 18 by 10 inches, not much bigger than a laptop screen. John found himself nearly completely upside down at a 70-degree angle. He spent some time trying to push himself up and out of the hole, but it was exhausting. His arms were trapped in a useless position, one bent under his chest and the other pinned against a rock beside him. He struggled against the walls and quickly realized that all his efforts would not move him back into the shallow tunnel. His calves and feet were still free in the passage, but his legs were now wedged into the narrower part of the hole, only 8 inches wide. He began shouting again for Josh. His brother knew he was trying to turn, so hearing him yell was not a good sign. Josh made his way back through the tight space, squeezing through the corkscrew, but this time he went feet first. He continued toward John's voice, climbing over the ledge. Finally, he reached a shocking sight. He could see only the end of John's legs sticking out from the rock as if he had been swallowed whole. He moved closer and managed to grab one of John's legs. He tried to pull up while John pushed from his end. After several failed attempts, both were exhausted and frustrated. Josh saw that this was serious and that they would need professional help to get him out. They agreed that Josh would go for help while John tried to remain as calm and relaxed as possible. As Josh went for help, one of the family friends entered the area to talk to John, letting him know he wasn't alone. For several hours, John remained trapped upside down, focusing mainly on the task of breathing. The fissure compressed his chest, allowing only shallow breaths. All his efforts to push upward had actually lodged him deeper into the crevice. Over time, gravity continued pulling him against the rough tunnel walls, squeezing his exhausted body. When help finally arrived, the first cave rescuer, Susie Mata, made her way to where John was trapped. It was 12:30 a.m., and John had been upside down for 3 hours. Susie was only 5 feet 3 inches tall, making it much easier for her to navigate the corkscrew section. She had ropes tied around her ankles as a precaution in case she got stuck too. She checked on John and assured him they would get him out. He must have felt a slight relief, believing professional help had arrived and he would soon be free from this trap. Susie strapped webbing around his legs and passed it back to the pit where the tunnel began. Several attempts were made to pull on the ropes to lift John out of the fissure. However, there was too much friction for an effective release, as he was still immobilized, unable to assist with his arms. After trying several things and considering more aggressive options, they decided to set up a pulley system to help lift and extract John. This pulley system had been successfully used when Brock Clark was trapped 5 years earlier. Though they had a plan, it was not an easy location to work in. Every piece of equipment had to be carried from the entrance, which took nearly an hour to reach through the corkscrew section. The tunnel was extremely tight, allowing only small power tools to be transported. Only one person could be present to assist at a time, and they had to be small or thin enough to move effectively through the passage. It was far from an ideal situation. Each pulley took an incredible amount of time to set up. Meanwhile, rescuers tried talking to John, comforting him, and sharing stories to keep him calm and engaged. John was a devout Mormon who spent time praying and singing to find comfort in this horrific situation. His body had been fighting against gravity for over 12 hours. The human brain is not designed to handle this kind of fluid pressure. Fluids were pooling in his lungs, and toxins were building up due to inadequate circulation. His organs pressed against his lungs, making every breath an exhausting effort for muscles not meant for such work. His breathing slowed, and he was completely drained from the struggle. Throughout the night, he went from being fully lucid and calm to desperately kicking his legs and hallucinating. A heartbreaking sight for the rescuers. They felt helpless, exhausted, and trapped themselves. The air in the cave system was warm and humid. It took superhuman effort to remain calm while being restrained, unable to move or breathe properly. But rescuers knew they could leave whenever necessary. John did not have that luxury. He could not expand his chest to breathe, and the air around him was slowly losing its oxygen concentration. During this time, a wired communication system was lowered to where John was trapped. His wife spoke to him, encouraging him to hold on and stay hopeful. John reassured her that he would be out soon. It wasn't until 4 a.m. that they finally had the pulleys in place to move him. Ryan Church was in the tunnel when the system was ready. John's body had settled into the narrow side of the opening, so Ryan had to push his legs while the team pulled from above. Each pull moved him inch by inch upward. By this point, John's legs were in excruciating pain. A rope had been tied around his legs for hours, while rescuers attempted various methods to help him. His legs were completely blue and had no detectable pulse. However, each pull made John scream in pain, as his nerves were hypersensitive at this stage. They paused to let him regain composure, then tried again. It seemed to be working. John was finally being pulled out of the hole. He was lifted enough for Ryan to make eye contact with him as they passed him a tube to drink some Gatorade. The effort was incredibly slow, and everyone was exhausted from the enormous task. Ryan was in a tunnel only 12 inches high, with his head near John's legs, slowly pulling him out of the 10-inch-wide fissure. After 19 hours upside down, they were seriously considering breaking his legs to fit him back into the passage, because time was running out for John. Then, in a sudden, blinding moment of pain, Ryan blacked out. When he came to, he was bleeding heavily and disoriented. The rope holding the pulley to a natural arch in the cave had snapped, whipping the carabiner directly into his face. He suffered facial injuries, a split lip, a tongue wound, and a concussion. He had to get out quickly. John was back where he started, completely trapped in the tunnel, with his arm's circulation cut off and his legs completely dead. He could no longer assist in freeing himself in any way. This moment marked the end for John Jones. After Ryan was checked over in the pit and later sent to the hospital, John's father, Dave, took his place in the passage with John. It took an hour to reset the pulley lines, and Dave tried to loop a rope around John's torso, but he couldn't pass it beyond his trapped body. The entire operation required John's help to be effective. There was no way to lift his 200-pound, 6-foot-tall body without his assistance in some form. John was no longer responding. and no sounds had been heard for hours. The rescue team gathered in the pit area of the cave and discussed the situation. It was determined that a medical professional needed to confirm his death. A paramedic was sent into the tight section to confirm what they feared. At 11:56 a.m. on Wednesday, November 25th, John Jones was pronounced dead. The rescue teams had worked tirelessly for 24 hours to free John, but it was simply impossible due to his position. The 6 members who had physically reached him in that treacherous section were truly heroic. They had willingly placed themselves in an unmapped and highly dangerous part of the cave. After determining that recovering his body was impossible, John was left to rest forever in the Ed's Push section of Nutty Putty Cave. The entire cave system was sealed with concrete to prevent future exploration. Today, a plaque stands there to commemorate John Jones's life and final feat.